the most surprising thing for me is that these generative models can actually produce good code, right? And the most one of the most interesting results recently has been this function search paper from Google, where they were able to actually solve new mathematical problems because they were able to invent new types of programs
Yeah.
and then search across them. So it's actually neurosymbolic. You're trying to create new programs by breaking up old programs, combining them in different ways so that you can solve a problem. So it's doing a search, which is neurosymbolic search,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
generation of those programs is through the neural network, which is
Correct.
GenAI. So
Yeah.
it's a completely different way. We never thought that the neural network would generate programs. We
Right.
thought the neural network could only guide the search that we would do while trying to, create new programs.
Hi, friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today, I have Dr. Gautam Shroff with me. Dr. Shroff is currently Senior Vice President and Head of Research at Tata Consulting Services. He completed his bachelor's from IIT Kanpur in electrical engineering and then pursued his PhD in computer science. And post completion of his PhD, he spent 7 years in academia and then joined TCS in 1998. Today, he has more than 150 publications to his name, multiple patents, and he heads the research at TCS. It's a great pleasure to have you on the show, sir, and looking forward to learning from you.
Thanks
Welcome
so
to
much. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. So, Dr. Shroff, the first question I have is, you went to US for your studies and you completed your PhD over there. But then you decided to come back to India. So, was that a personal decision? What triggered that decision for you?
Well, for me, it wasn't necessarily a decision to come back, it was a decision not to stay.
Okay.
Okay. So people used to tell me about something called the X plus one syndrome in those days.
Hmm.
You say that I'll go back next year, I'll go back next year, and then you sort of settle down. Then you get into a career, then you get into a tenured professorship. It never happens. So I thought, well, why not do it in the very beginning? And when I was at Caltech, uh,
Hmm.
the then IIT director,
Hmm.
right? So he happened to show up. He was getting a distinguished alumni award, and
Okay.
he met me and he
Hmm.
said, "Why don't you come?" So I said, "Okay." So he pretty much convinced me that you'll do just as good work in IIT. So I came. Very simple. Yeah.
Great.
So
And
it means director should go out and meet people.
okay, great. Uh, and then once you were back, you spent about, I think, 6 years at IIT Delhi, and then decided to move to industry research as opposed to staying in academia. So, what was the thought there, and was there any specific instance which drove that decision?
Well, even when I was in the US, Professor Subbarao, who was heading TCS or Tata Research and Tata Research in
Mhm.
the development center, he had contacted me, and I had thought, well, let me go to IIT because I didn't know about this place.
Okay.
Because I guess it is a well kept secret even today, unfortunately,
Yeah.
the extent of research that is done. But I came and then I used to go to Bombay and my parents were, and I met Mr. Kohli because he was known to my father, and he used to tell me every year, "Why don't you come?" I started
Mhm.
consulting for TCS then, and one day I said, "Okay." I mean, every year I get asked, and one day you say, "Okay," right?
So the learning there is to ask
Yeah.
regularly
And he
for.
was a great man. Mr. Kohli was a great man.
He was great. So then, when you joined TCS, right? So, how much of focus at that time was on, let's say, research related to AI and ML, and then how has been this journey of TCS research labs in that sense over the last 26 years that being there?
Well, I mean, if you go back, my master's thesis was in AI,
Yeah.
in expert systems, which was the rage then in the 80s. And then I didn't get any funding for PhD in AI because there was nothing. Okay,
Okay.
that was in AI winter. So I did my PhD in parallel computing, scientific computing, all that kind of interesting stuff. But I continued for many years. So when I joined TCS, I had really not lost touch with anything to do with AI, and there was really no AI in industry at that stage. At the same time, one of the projects which I got involved with, which was our banking product, did happen to have a small AI engine, which was built by
Interesting.
the research team. So from the very beginning, there was some AI. I wasn't
Mhm,
the developer of that. I mean, it was somebody else, but it was there. So for
mhm,
many years, there was no real AI in industry, as far as we could see. It only started happening when this whole big data buzz started taking place somewhere around the mid 2000s, that we
mhm,
figured out that data is important, and that's when I think I was visiting Yahoo uh,
mhm,
way back in 2005 or six, and and I went to the lab and they said there's something called Hadoop. I said,
mhm.
what is this funny name? So we got started with that even before they released it. Okay,
Okay.
so I mean, it started then really. All that.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. And then obviously, post that it has accelerated the amount of attention which AI is getting today. So what were the, let's say, significant milestones for you during this period? So post 2005, 2006 till date, how has been this period, and what have been your areas of focus during this period?
See, I think data got very so a lot of attention when this Hadoop MapReduce and all that started becoming interesting.
Yeah.
We got very great advisors which helped us. We had Jeff Holman as our advisor, and we did some work. He brought us into this whole area very very early, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Jeff, as you know, is a Turing awardee, passed away a couple of years back, and he's been in data and worked with everybody in the industry. So he was our advisor from way back then, and we started doing work in MapReduce and that kind of stuff for large organizations for accelerating data processing. And they started building data lakes and all that. So the AI component was not that evident at that stage
Correct.
in any of the work that was being done. It sort of happened a little bit later when people started figuring out that, look, with all this data, you can also do mining. So
Yeah.
people started looking for patterns and stuff like that. So that, but again, it was very low key. It was really about massively, processing data in a more efficient way for your data warehouse and developing your data marts efficiently and all that stuff, right?
Right.
Uh, the the sort of excitement about AI sort of happened almost a decade later, 2015, I think. Which
Yeah.
was 2 or 3 years after the AlexNet moment, and when we figured out that deep learning, there's something new happening which you really couldn't do earlier, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's when we started looking at a whole bunch of things. Yeah.
Right. And during this period, how did your strategy to build the research team change? I mean, were you looking for, let's say, more engineering skills when big data was in focus, or are you've kept the subject focused knowledge out and focused on finding good researchers? Can you elaborate a bit more on?
Um, it's always like that. I mean, we always look for researchers only, whether that was in
Mhm.
the 90s or later on, right?
Mhm.
The idea of when I joined TCS Research, which was TRDCC and still is in Pune, the mantra was hire good people and let them loose, right?
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
only way you can let them loose and let them do what they want to do, give them the environment to do what they want to do, and make a change in the world, and publish at top venues and be at the cutting edge.
Yeah.
So that's the way it's been. Whether it's in there was a lot of research being done in and still is not in
Right.
AI, in systems, in software, in security. There's so much research being done. Doesn't
Mhm.
everything doesn't have to be AI? It just happens to be the buzz of the
Right.
day and the stuff like that. But that doesn't mean there's nothing else to do in computer science.
Right. Right. That is true. That is true. And from your own experience, right, and specifically, in the last year or so, generative AI has got so much attention. When was your, aha moment with that? Was it, GPT-1, GPT-2, or maybe before that? So, what were some of the, let's say, milestones or timestamps when you yourself were surprised with what AI capabilities were coming out?
Well, I got into this because of my. I was teaching also, so I was used to teach, and I used to teach a course called Meta Learning. Started way
Mhm.
back, about almost 6 years back, right? Became when this whole meta learning, few shot learning, all that became interesting. So I taught this course at IIT, Triple IT, BITS Goa, all three.
Okay.
And essentially, there was a paper long back. I think it was a GPT-3 paper, which
Yeah.
talked about that large language models are few shot learning, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So few shot learning is all what meta learning is about. So when
Right.
I saw that, I said, look, there's something new because this is not the way, Chelsea Finn and others who had invented meta learning as a concept. This is
Yeah.
not the way. Actually, sorry, Jurgen had always invented meta learning before that because he's invented everything, I think.
Hmm.
But the this is different. So this is something which you trained it for X and it's doing Y. So that's when I realized that this can do meta learning, and I brought that into the course.
Hmm.
But the real aha moment obviously came when it was released to the public last November.
Yeah.
Not last November 2022,
22.
when
Yeah.
we figured out that this is far better than what we would have expected from things like GPT-3. And
Right.
then we learned later why it's the case and all
Sure, sure. And I saw a talk which you gave back in 2019 where you had mentioned three ways in which you could learn with very little data, right? So the first one was transfer learning, the second one was reinforcement learning, and the third one was neuro-detective learning, right? The first two obviously have gained a lot of attention over the last few years, but I'm really interested in what you meant by neuro-deductive learning, and you've published a few papers on that later as well. So can you elaborate a bit on
that.
the thought there, and how
Sure, sure.
yeah.
See, to put it very simply, uh, when you have a neural network approach,
Hmm.
you are essentially taking an input and running through a whole bunch of computations and producing an output. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
There's a little bit of engineering which goes into deciding what that output is. If you look at say, a generative model, it's going to do a bit of a beam search and does a more elaborate beam search if the question is harder and stuff like that. But essentially, it doesn't do search in the traditional AI sense of trying to search for a solution, right?
Yeah.
Like you're trying to solve what is the next move in chess. You're actually searching through a whole bunch of moves, right?
Correct.
In things like Alpha Zero and Alpha Mu and eventually Alpha Go, there's a lot of search going on. That search is actually directed by neural network, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So because they learn what is the best way to go in the search tree, etc., etc. But that is more of the neural network is helping in that search, right? In some sense, that
Hmm.
is a type of neuro-deductive learning, in my view, right? So I
Hmm.
think that you know if you don't have much data, you have to search for the solution. Search
Right.
is essentially an exhaustive process, right?
Correct. Hmm.
I mean, if you search forever, you will find the solution because ultimately everything in the world is finite, but
Correct.
time is not, right? So you don't have enough time to search for everything. So you need guidance. And from a very little data and past experience of searching, you can actually learn better ways of searching.
Hmm.
Right? So that's one of the ways we did. For example, we did this of marrying neural networks with the genetic algorithms, right?
Hmm.
Again, a form of neuro-evolutionary learning, right? So when you take these traditional AI techniques and put neural networks together with them,
Hmm.
it brings neuro-symbolic, and neuro-deductive is just one form of that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And I mean, in the way industry has shaped in the last few years, right? The approach has been throw a lot more data and compute at it and let it figure out. So not as much about symbolic learning. Whereas this in that sense a bit more hybrid approach, right? But for the current methods, this is one of the limitations, that the logical reasoning capabilities are not good enough. Even if you try and do this with GPT-4, it has its limitations. So do you see this area as, one of the areas which will grow in the coming years and would become more and more relevant in the way AI shapes up? Or how do you see this
Well,
evolving?
I think again, see, the last year or year, little more than a year has been transformative for everybody, right?
Yeah,
So the way one would think a year and a half ago and the way one thinks now is completely different, right?
that's true.
Uh, if you think about new symbolic learning, right? Uh, we never expected that the sort of amazing results would come from language first, right?
Correct.
We always
Yeah,
thought it would come from vision first, right?
vision. True.
And some sort of bottom-up learning of concepts would happen and all that. But it happened through language, and it was a surprise to everybody. And in some sense, it's symbolic
Hmm.
because even though the mechanism is through a neural network, the outputs are actually symbolic reasoning steps which can be understood and explained, and we can read them, and we can agree or disagree with the model's quote unquote reasoning.
Hmm.
We were never able to do this. If you were to give a neural network in vision and say,
Hmm.
is this a dog or a cat? It says it's a dog. You never can't ask it, why is it a dog? Why is it a cat? It might tell you because of these patches or whatever, but it won't explain to you.
Right.
With a
Right.
generative model, it'll explain to you because it has, a long tail, this, that, whatever, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this is symbolic explanations coming out of the model rather than going in. So which is
Got.
completely different from what was there before. So it's neurosymbolic in a very different way than we
Yeah.
used to work on it before.
Right. Right. Very interesting. And do you see this gaining a lot more attention in the next few years?
I think so because ultimately, the most surprising thing for me is that these generative models can actually produce good code, right? And one of the most interesting results recently has been this function search paper from Google, where they were able to actually solve new mathematical problems because they were able to invent new types of programs
Yeah.
and then search across them. So it's actually neurosymbolic. So you're actually trying to create symbolic programs. Programs are symbolic, after all. You're trying to create new programs by breaking up old programs, combining them in different ways so that you can solve a problem. So it's doing a search, which is neurosymbolic search,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
generation of those programs is through the neural network, which is
Correct.
GenAI. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
completely different way. We never thought that the neural network could generate programs. We
Right.
thought the neural network could only guide the search that we would do while trying to, create new programs. But it's
Mm.
creating a new programs itself, and we're using it to search, which is completely a new way of doing. But it's neurosymbolic because you're searching in symbolic space using the neural network to generate the possible options.
True, true. And from your perspective, right, and then just projecting a bit in future, let's say next 2 to 3 years, what are some of the key developments you are, let's say, looking forward to in AI research space, which you think would be marked difference in the way we look at AI today?
Yeah, yeah. For the first time, and I mean, I've been working in area for AI for more than, say about 15 years. Uh, for the first time, I think it has become a commodity. I mean, you can get AI on a pipe, right? So if you have a problem, ask the AI.
Yeah.
You have a trouble coding something, you have a bug, ask the AI, will try to fix it.
Mhm.
I never expected this, right? So I think the most interesting things going forward are going to be one, how to best use these tools,
Mhm.
right? I think they're excellent accelerators for our thinking.
Mhm.
So in every field, how Gen AI can help humans think and work better, or learn also. I mean, obviously learn. So if you see what Khan Academy has done, which is fantastic stuff. They're
Yeah.
trying to make good learning using Gen AI. The second is how we will be able to trust the output, right?
Mhm.
And that requires computer science, not just AI. Okay, because ultimately, uh, apart from the online world where it doesn't matter if the ad that you were shown is the wrong one, because it's okay, you didn't click it, you didn't crash a car because of that, right?
Yeah.
uh, so where the so the consequence is extremely mission critical, right?
Yeah.
Then I think one needs to have a lot of safety features on how the output is used
Mhm.
uh, without human intervention. So with human interventions, it's an accelerator.
Yeah.
Without human interventions, can the output of today's AI actually be used in a trustworthy way?
Mm.
That is where a lot of the work is going to have to go in. Right.
Interesting. And so coming to the first, area which you mentioned, so using these tools for different use cases, are there any areas where you have adopted it internally in your teams to accelerate the research work which is going on? And can you share some of those use cases?
Well, I don't want to talk about what's happening internally in TCS,
Sure.
right? It
Okay.
doesn't make a lot of sense. But one thing I did do,
Mhm.
minute this came out, so last December, I said, look, I have to do something and start using it, right?
Mhm.
So I built a tool which I only use for myself, right? Which
Mhm.
essentially, every time I see an interesting article, I dump the link there, and then overnight it summarizes it, it takes the keywords, it extracts the methodology from the paper, it figures out its applicability to the areas which I'm interested in. It does that overnight.
Mhm.
It does
Okay.
it every day. It does every day. And so in the morning I have everything all done, right? So that's something which has been running now for almost a year now, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
uh, so a lot of stuff in it, so I found it useful and I'm expanding it continuously. So I think there's a lot that we can do. Right? I'm doing a few other projects as well, but I don't want to talk about things which are internal to TCS. So this was a tool which I built for my own use, which I think, uh, anyway, it's only for my own use. So yeah.
Sure, sure. Got it, got it. And the second part which you mentioned that how to trust the output, and again the two scenarios which you mentioned, right? So mission critical things like let's say banking or self-driving cars. Uh, in these areas, what how do you see systems which essentially also enhance trust in their usage? So do you see new kind of architectures coming up? Do you see new ways of using AI, or different ways of using AI which would make progress in that direction?
Look, I mean, these are all research areas, so I can only speculate what will work
Right.
and what will not work.
Yeah.
But for example, it's always that if you approach something in many different ways, right,
Hmm.
and it comes to the same answer, then you trust it more, right? So
Hmm.
it's like software. Somebody tests it more, you get more trustworthy. We don't longer prove things correctly, right? So we don't do the extra proof right now. But suppose from natural language specifications, you could come out with model-based specifications of a program, and then generate the program and see if those things actually matched in the traditional, program verification way, right?
Hmm.
That's one more sort of data reason to trust the output. Then, of course, you could carry this up many levels. You could prove the proof also, right? You could keep doing this, but all of this is just to increase the chances that you could use something in a slightly slightly more critical application without human intervention. I won't let it control a nuclear power plant for sure, but certainly, if it's working on part of my hard disk to clean up my repository, and I have a backup somewhere, I may let it loose.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then if it passes the regression test, I may believe that it has done some good stuff, right? Without checking every line that it's actually changed, right?
Got it. Got it. So essentially, testing with the existing systems, and then incremental usage is essentially how
Yeah.
you see some of these getting into. Great. Uh, and uh, you know in specifically talking about the vision area, right? So let's say diffusion models and some of vision focused models. Any specific developments you see on that side, and then how they've come up over the years?
Yeah, I'm not that close to the vision area. I was because there's only that many things I can actually focus on. There are, of course, my team members working very closely in that area, but it's been a fantastic uh, development for sure that you could actually sketch and do things. I think again, making it easier for people to actually develop their own style of artistic expression, right?
Mhm,
Is the direction which will be the most useful and most positive impact from this.
mhm.
Uh, Ultimately, people pay for art because it's generated by people and there's a human expression there that they're trying to capture.
Yeah.
Uh, what would be a sort of a disappointing direction is if artists themselves get sort of disheartened by the ability to generate things automatically, So much better if we use it as a tool for in making artists even more expressive and help them out. So that's, I think, the better direction we will see things go. Technically, of course, there's this progress has been just immense, right? So what we are doing now with images, I mean, soon we'll do the same thing with that level of fidelity with more than just small video clips, but entire movies and things like that. So it's going to be quite an interesting area.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. And with so much happening, and then you yourself mentioned this briefly, that there is a lot to kind of track in terms of progress happening in the domain. Uh, what would be your, let's say, advice to someone who is relatively young and entering into the field now? How should they think about their career, and then how should they shape their career in the next few years?
It's a difficult question, to a certain extent. The most impacted people from generative AI has been the natural language processing researcher,
Right.
right? So, I mean, it's a difficult place to be if you were to your career was based on making sort of NLP neural network advances.
Right.
Uh, so for a young researcher, there are a couple of things. One is I would say stay away from the bandwagon.
Mhm,
Okay, there's a lot to be done in this area. For example, uh, we have started off in AI by trying to understand the brain.
mhm.
And now we have this animal which we don't understand either, which is the genius. So
Yeah.
why don't we just try to understand what the hell's going on? And it's one particular direction one could go, right?
Yeah.
From the academic perspective. From the industrial perspective, I think it's important to say what is the problem I want to solve,
Mhm,
and how is that going to make life better for anyone or any organization or whatever, and
mhm,
then see uh, sort of filter the stream of new techniques and all that come every day through those eyes. Is this, I get maybe 10, 12 papers coming in every day which are mildly interesting.
mhm,
Which one of them are of any interest to what I'm trying to solve
mhm.
and why? Right. And yes, a lot of Gen AI can help us even figure that out faster without wasting our time.
Yeah.
Right? But then read those carefully. Right.
Mhm.
If you try to read everything today in the field, it is almost impossible. And the
Right.
second is, become a reviewer for various conferences and stuff. You learn a lot by reviewing because you see things which you would never have read because you
Yeah.
may not be that interested in that area, but you see what others are doing. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And in terms of any specific areas which you would or you feel very uh, uh, I would say, very hopeful about in terms of what could be some of the areas which new researchers can pursue specifically.
Well, today generative AI is definitely there. I think one of the most exciting areas is how generative AI can be used for science. Of course, the recent work with protein folding just a few years back on Alpha Zero and Alpha Fold was just one example. But now people are doing that using Gen AI. People are solving problems which you could never have solved using Gen AI. That's one. The second is to see what's going to happen in domains which are traditionally extremely difficult, right? Where these techniques just don't really work through yet. It's not the sweet spot for things like where there's a lot of noise, right? Uh, Especially things like finance, right?
Hmm.
A lot of noise, right? Derivatives
Yeah.
and volatility prediction, stuff like that. So the hedge funds are all working in this area, but that's an area which is very difficult, right? The signal is very low and the noise is very high. I think
Yeah.
that's a very interesting area to be in because what we have seen is that deep models can actually track chaotic systems.
Hmm.
Uh, Now they're becoming so powerful. It's an interesting area to get into it.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. And you also mentioned that becoming reviewer with some of the conferences, and so can you recommend a few conferences which people attend? And again, I'm talking from people who are relatively early in their career in this domain. What would be some of the conferences you would recommend them to be part of, either obviously as a reviewer or just attending the conferences as well?
Well, reviewer, of course, you have to be invited. You can't just become a reviewer.
Correct.
But firstly, in India, in 2013, I sort of got some people together and we started the India chapter of ACM SIG KDD,
Hmm.
right? And which runs the KDD conference.
Yeah.
And we started the CORDS conference, the Conference on Data Sciences, under the India chapter of KDD. Now it's become the CORDS COMAD conference because COMAD merged into it. So I think anybody in the field should look at attending that conference for sure. It
Sure.
happens every year, typically in January. This time it was in Bangalore.
Hmm.
And that's the first starting point for any researcher in India in that field. The
Hmm.
second thing is go to the reviewer, the sort of the iClear and ICML and other conferences where the reviews are done through open review, right?
Yeah.
Where anybody can actually see the reviews which are being posted and can also contribute to those reviews,
Right.
not as official reviewers but as unofficial reviewers. And that's a great way to learn this whole
Hmm.
process of academic review.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks. Thanks for sharing. That's it. Uh, and in terms of all the research which you see today, and then you have multiple publications in various fields yourself. Uh, which, if you have to pick one or a few areas which you think are going to be the most impactful in development of AI as a field, right, or progress towards maybe building more AGI systems, what would those areas be, or what would those fields be?
No, I don't know about the AGI. AGI is a sort of if you talk if 3, 4, 5 years ago, if someone gave you a demo of ChatGPT and says, suppose we had this, would you call it AGI? They would say, yes, of course,
Yes,
because
correct.
nobody imagined it is possible, right?
No, it's a vague term. I
Uh,
agree.
Now it's not AGI, so AGI has got to be something more. So it's always a moving bar. Okay,
Yeah.
and people confuse what is AGI, what is not AGI. So uh, I think vanilla AI for a large number of applications, those tools are a commodity.
Right.
The big challenges are in understanding why these things work. That's one,
Mhm.
right? Second is in making them more trustworthy, right? And
Yeah.
third is in looking at areas where they don't work,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
For example, I gave you finance in one area. Other area is a lot of IQ tests, right? If you talk about AGI, I mean, it had better pass an IQ test and be an Einstein level IQ, right? Well, it doesn't. Okay, because those tests require an understanding of basic knowledge of the physical world, right? Symmetry, things like that, which don't come easily to AI systems. And data, throwing data at it doesn't really help that much, right?
Correct.
Even if it's seen everything in the world, right? If you develop a new IQ puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Most of these Gen AI models, etc., still struggle. Melanie Mitchell has just recently written a paper on one of those problems called concept R. GPT-4 struggles, everything is still struggling. And I
Hmm.
think that's an area which, if you think about AGI, unless you can solve those really difficult analogical reasoning problems, like which are in IQ tests, which are not on the internet, right? New ones,
Yeah.
obviously,
Hmm.
then it would be interesting.
And for that to happen, do you see any specific areas which could play a pivotal role for this to happen?
I think neurosymbolic is an important area. I mean, combining this business of search with the ability to generate things and bringing everything together, but ultimately with a goal in mind, right? That
Hmm.
how we think, how our system two thinks. If you go back to the system one, system two Kahneman thesis, well, neural networks so far have been system one. Now with GPTs, they have sort of exhibited some elements of system two, mainly because of the depth, the chain of thought, the beam search, and all that. But we aren't really doing system two. Uh, Monte Carlo True Search was doing some kind of system two. Now, bringing these things together, right?
Hmm.
Maybe even bringing diffusion concepts together, really to do more system two reasoning at inference time. If you think about that, how do
Yeah,
we do that better? I don't know how, but I think that's a very important area.
got it. And if you have to go in that direction, do you see a single large model like a GPT-4, or do you see specific domain expertise models which are, essentially doing those symbolic searches in those domains coming out first?
No, the large models are just going to get better and better, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
They're going to get exponentially better once they start seeing videos, and
Hmm.
that's happening, as you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so the open source models, the smaller ones, etc., will be there, but the size does matter in this space. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you have access to large models, then how you put them together to actually do what I'm saying,
Hmm.
that is going to be the area where interesting things are going to probably happen, right? Uh, of course, I can't predict the future. If I could, then it'd be fantastic. But
Interesting, interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And uh, in terms of, I think you again touched about this briefly, which is open source versus large proprietary models. And then, obviously, uh, OpenAI is right now the benchmark and the leading practice. But uh, what are your views on, open source models, and then their development, and then how do you see that playing out over the, let's say, next year
well,
to
open source models are almost as good as ChatGPT 3.5
correct?
already. Like the Mixtral 7, the MOE model is certainly there,
Hmm.
and they will get to that stage soon, right? Uh, I think in the coming year, open source models of a certain size with enough GPU backing will get somewhere close to what GPT-4 is today, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But they'll require size and compute, which might be unaffordable for anybody to actually run. So there will be companies which run some of those open source models for you. So it's proprietary in that sense that it costs a lot of money to run those models, right? Uh, that's where I think we'll get. Now, if whether we're going to get beyond GPT-4 performance, the evidence seems to suggest that it might take some time.
Hmm.
Right? Otherwise, it would have happened so far. It was if it was truly an exponential increase, right? But then I don't know. I'm not privy to the internals of what's happening there, and we'll have to see what Gemini Ultra is and whether that's going to be close to GPT-4, surpass it, not close. We don't know. So we don't know. I mean, this is like I said, this is an animal which we don't understand, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing which is going to probably happen is somebody is going to start taking these more efficient models, which are
Mm.
these state space like models, right?
Yeah.
Which are not quadratic but linear in their
Mm.
inference time, and start scaling them.
Correct.
And when we start scaling those, we'll see whether this same emergent phenomena happen there or they don't happen there. Right?
Mm.
And that's also something interesting to see. So again, this is an area where you just have to do it and see.
Yeah.
It's as Jeff Bezos recently said, it's not an invention; it's a discovery.
Right. Right.
It is a
Uh,
phenomena that you've discovered.
that is true. That is true. Uh, just moving, the discussion to, something which you referred before in the discussion. So, today, if you look at India specifically, from a research perspective, I think, while the number of publications in AI has increased, but we are still not one of the top nations contributing towards the research, right? So what are some of the initiatives or things which can be done to grow this ecosystem? And you mentioned some of the conferences which you started, but any other areas which you think should be done to kind of enhance the research and the quality of research happening across institutes?
See, institutes are just one part of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Institutes have their own constraints. One of the biggest constraints the institutes have is the quality of the PhD students. Right.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not saying they're bad, but the number of good ones is much smaller than perhaps in another country, whether it's China or whether it is the US or whether it is Europe. The volume of really good students is not as much as it is. Okay, there are certainly PhD students, but not all of them are at that level. Many of them are, but not all. So what we need to do is bring up that quality. And one of the reasons why people go abroad for a PhD is that uh, they need to be in an environment where there are equally good large number of PhD students, researchers. So what I have been trying to persuade people in academia that I talk to is let
Hmm.
us work, and even those overseas, let us try a model that let us make it easy for people to have dual degree PhD, right? 2 years here, 2 years in another country at a top university, and uh, they can get degrees from one of the two or both, right? If they're good enough, right? We need more and more such options, which will encourage people to stay back to do part of their PhDs in an Indian institution, the good ones, the really good ones, and the quality starts going up. See, it's
Yeah.
a game of quality, not of quantity. So when you started off by saying quantity in top conferences doesn't come by just writing more
Correct.
papers. It comes by writing more good papers and having more people
Mhm.
in the field. Right.
Correct.
But then AI is not in such a bad state in India. I mean, the AI field in Indian academia is actually much better than many other fields.
Right.
Right.
Mm.
So there are many fields where we have hardly anyone, given the nature of that field, right? Say quantum computing, a very small number of people. Hardly
Yeah.
anyone who knows how to actually build it. Perhaps at TIFR there are a few people, ISL there are a few people who are actually building things. But
Mhm.
there are fields which are far worse off than AI, which are important.
True. Interesting. Uh, so dual degrees is one area where you put a lot of emphasis on. Uh, and again, specifically for people who are getting into colleges and universities and then are looking at doing research in future, any tips or any advice you would want to share in terms of what should they do? So they are going to spend, let's say, next 3 4 years in academia. What should they how should they shape their career in that sense?
You see, I think research is not the only thing that matters, right?
Yeah.
Today in AI, it is also development, deployment, making a difference,
Hmm.
translating what is already available into something which is useful, right? So just going into research because it looks like a less pressured area than going and doing a startup. That's not the right thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, if the young fellows go and do a startup which makes a difference to society, that's number one. That would be the number one priority that people should do, right?
Hmm.
Number two, if you really think you are good in research in the sense that you want to really advance the state of the art, then by all means, do research. But when you do research, I think it's a question of saying what is the problem you're solving. It's not enough to say I work in AI.
Hmm.
You have to say what are you trying to solve, and AI is one of the things I use to solve it. Or what is the problem you're trying to solve? That then it becomes research which is of interest and meaning, right? That's what I think. So going in so that I could write the next incremental paper is kind of a waste of your time, I think, in many ways, right? You have to have a passionate problem that you want to solve, and it has to be an important problem, and then it becomes a very worthwhile pursuit, which will give you a lot of satisfaction. Otherwise, it will give you a lot of frustration.
Great. Thanks a lot for sharing those. Just before we, close the discussion, one of the things which we do with our guests is a few, rapid fire questions about you.
Okay.
So, so
Okay.
I would love to hear the thoughts as they come to your mind. Uh, and any book which influenced you a lot in the way you think and operate?
Ah, Gödel Bach, no question.
Okay.
Hofstadter in my college days. I mean,
Okay.
that's how I got interested in AI in the first place. And that's why I said my master should be in AI. And then, of course, there was no funding. What to do?
Uh, and do you read a lot of books, or you read a few books but reread them and then do deep reading about those?
I used to read a lot of books. I
Mhm.
read, at present, I read 4 or 5 books at a time and never finish any of them,
Okay.
unfortunately. So I read parts and pieces of the books, but I haven't finished a book for a while.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And which was the most influential book you came across in the last few months or years, which
I
you
don't
thought?
know. I'm reading a nice book right now called The Brief History of Intelligence by,
Okay.
I think, Max Bennett or someone. It's a very nice book.
Mhm.
I can't recall all the books I've read. I'm sorry.
No problem. Uh, if you had all the resources in the world, what would be some of the most exciting problems you would want to solve?
AI for science, right? AI for education and AI
Hmm.
for finance. Three things,
Okay. Okay.
right?
Mhm. And within those fields, any specific problems? So when you say, for example, AI for science or AI for education, any particular aspect which you want to make a high impact on?
Well, let's look at research internships,
Hmm.
right? Every week I get uh, at least 2 mails from somebody in some university or institute in the country saying I want to do an internship, right?
Hmm.
I don't have the time to take on all these interns. But could one actually give them decent research internships, get them exposed to research, maybe even come out with a publication which has a decent chance in some good conference without taking away my bandwidth. So I only
Interesting.
provide enough pointers and Gen AI does the rest. I'd love to do that.
Interesting. Very interesting. So almost like a uh, research TA or
Co-pilot.
yeah, co-pilot. Actually, co-pilot
Yeah,
is the
with some guidance because otherwise it may go on the wrong track and they need some interaction. and I
Mhm.
need to give them recommendation at the end of it. So what will I say if I haven't talked to them? But I can't spend that much time with them as I would like to.
Mhm.
But can Gen AI take over for parts where I don't doesn't have time to? And then it does a good for everybody in some way.
Mhm. Sure. Uh, for people entering the domain, should they spend time learning coding, or that's no longer a big requirement according to you?
Of course, it's a requirement. I mean, if the code comes out of the model, does it
Hmm.
mean it's not? You don't need to understand it. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to integrate it. Would you trust a system which has been built with no human supervision on top of that? We are not there yet. We may get there, but to get there, you better know how to write code, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Great.
So I don't write code myself from scratch anymore.
Okay. Hmm.
I
Great.
mean, who does, right? I mean, I tell
Yeah.
my students when I'm teaching, please use Gen AI to write your code
True.
because it's faster. That way, I get more done from them as well.
Correct.
But
That
they have
is.
to fix it, right? They have to make sure it works.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot, Dr. Shroff, for those insights and sharing your point of view. It was really great to have you on the show, and then looking forward to your research on neurodeductive area. I think that's something which I would look out for. So thanks a lot for taking time out and sharing those insights with the community.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.